Hello, my friends, and welcome to our Bible study on the book of Genesis. Today we'll be in chapter 34. This is kind of a tragic story in many ways, as you'll see as we go through the text. The title I would give to this chapter is The Rape of Dinah, Dinah in Hebrew. So before we plunge into the verse by verse study of this chapter of Genesis, I do want to take some time to review some of the background material via my PowerPoint. Once again, I will suggest if you've been through this PowerPoint before and not much is changing in it today, I encourage you to just fast forward in the video until you get to the Bible software part where you can look at the first few verses of Genesis 34. And in the meantime, for those who may not be familiar with the background, I do want to provide a little bit of that by going through our PowerPoint. So here we go. I have been advertising a book that I wrote, I guess, the beginning of this year called Nazarene Essene Theology. This is a systematic theology from the perspective of the sects of the Nazarenes and Essenes. Essenes are famous as the Dead Sea Scrolls people. Um, I think maybe the greatest value of this book for this particular Bible study in Genesis is, since this book goes from Genesis to Revelation, there is a lot of material about the book of Genesis. So if you want maybe a little bit more in-depth study of the book of Genesis than we're getting in these videos, you might want to take a look at that book. All of my books are available on Amazon. They're available a few other places, but Amazon is the best place to find them. We've also been using a dispensational chart from a book of a series of charts that go from Genesis to Revelation in the Bible. And this is the fourth dispensation or historical period of stewardship that God placed upon humanity. It's called the Age of Promise. And although God had been making promises in all of the dispensations prior to this one, and continues to make promises in all the dispensations afterwards, promise is the topic that is most prominent in this era of biblical history. We have the Abrahamic covenant and all the promises associated with it. So let us just briefly kind of follow the red ribbon of salvation or redemption as it goes through the family of the Hebrew patriarchs, the chosen people, the Jewish people, who would ultimately become the nation of Israel. The first to receive a call from God was Avram, whose name is later changed to Abraham. Then comes Isaac, his son, the son of promise. And even though Abraham bore Ishmael as a son through Hagar, his wife Sarai's Egyptian maidservant, the son of promise was Isaac. Isaac was the father of Yaakov and Esav, Jacob and Esau. Jacob's name, just a few chapters ago, was changed to Israel through a wrestling match that he had with God. Then Yaakov Israel becomes the father of the 12 sons that are listed here on the chart. These would later become the ancestors, the forefathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. Counting those tribes is sometimes kind of tricky, but the sons' names all appear here. The reason I say that is because Joseph had two sons named Ephraim and Manasseh, and each of them received real estate in the Promised Land. So Joseph is listed here. So counting the tribes is sometimes kind of tricky, especially when it comes to the distribution of land in the Promised Land. So the red ribbon of salvation goes through Yehuda. He would be the ancestor of the nobility in Israel, the kings of Israel, and Levi would be the patriarch of the chief of the priests of Israel and the religious worship leaders called the Levites. So this was the religious tribe, Judah was the political tribe, and the Messiah would be born from this tribe of Yehuda. And then the red ribbon leads us down to the 4 generations that the Hebrews spent in Egypt, ultimately becoming slaves there. The story of Joseph leads up to that, and we'll be starting the story of Joseph pretty soon. So at that point, our background material here is going to change somewhat. But while we're still talking about the first 3 generations, Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, we're going to keep most of this material the same. The first map here we have on the PowerPoint is the early journeys of Abraham from Ur of the Chaldeans to the Promised Land. And when I'm circling the Promised Land like this, I'm not doing the Promised Land justice. As we see in these 2 Bible passages, Genesis 13 and Genesis 15, we learn that the boundaries of the Promised Land extend from the River of Egypt on the west or the left side of the screen, all the way to the great river Euphrates on the the northeast boundary. So the Promised Land takes in a very large portion of the modern day Middle East. It is a region that has never been fully occupied by the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. This is the land that they would walk upon. It is land that they would see with their eyes, and it is land that was deeded to them by Almighty God in Genesis 15 from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. This map shows the travels on one occasion of Avram and Sarai to Egypt, where they spent some time there and then returned during a time of famine, which brings the western boundary to the great river Euphrates, where Abraham and Sarai walked and viewed the land. This map that we have been looking at shows the travels of Yaakov. This is the travels of Yaakov and his generation, because he spent much of his early adult life up in Haran, which is the extended family's, it's their area, it's their region where they settled. Yitzhak's wife, Rivka, was from the extended family. When Yaakov traveled to Haran, the city of the patriarchs, there he fell in love with Rachel, but ended up marrying her sister Leah and also Rachel. And each one of those brides of Yaakov also had a maidservant that was part of the deal. So we've got Bilhah and Zilpah. So Yaakov ends up married to 4 women, and all of them will produce sons for him. So the green arrows here show his travels to Haran and back home from there. He spent about 20 years in Haran. So most of his sons were born in Haran, and a daughter was born there. There was only one child that was born in the Promised Land, and that will be Benjamin. After Yosef was born in Haran, the second youngest of his sons, then Yaakov decided to return to the Promised Land and continue his work of being a shepherd and kind of representing God in that territory. So these are the travels of Yaakov. This is just a blown up map so that we can see some of the important places where Yaakov lived his life and did his ministry. Today we're going to be focused on this city called Shechem or Shechem in Hebrew. Shechem is the Hebrew word for a shoulder. So it's like a part of the human anatomy, but it's most often used in scripture in kind of a verbal sense of like rising up, especially early in the morning. So if a character is said to Shechem, that means that they rose up early in the morning to get busy with the day's work or something. It is also the name of a Bible character, Shechem or Shechem, who was the son of Hamor. His father was a prince in the region that we'll be talking about today. We will be talking about the city of Shechem that I think was either named after Shechem, the son of Hamor, or Hamor named his son Shechem after the city. So not sure which is the arrangement, but we have a city called Shechem and we have a Bible character named Shechem. And then Hamor. I told you what Shechem means in Hebrew. Hamor is the Hebrew word for a donkey. And you can make out of that what you will. As we learn more about Hamor and Shechem today, about their character and so forth, we'll see whether or not these names are fitting for them. In this screen, I brought up kind of a controversial subject where, although I have always interpreted Yaakov as being kind of a trickster, kind of a dirty dealer, not, the most upstanding moral person, I came across Genesis 25:27, where he is referred to as a Tom, which means, and this part in the yellow highlighting that I'm circling here is a lexicon definition of the word Tom, which means complete, usually morally pious, gentle, dear, coupled together perfect, plain, undefiled, and upright. And none of those terms are terms I would have used to Yaakov. So this caused me to kind of rethink my assessment of Yaakov and see if maybe he is a more upstanding character, maybe a more righteous character than I interpreted. So we have applied this label of Tom to the stories in which we have followed Yaakov. We'll continue to do so today and see if he is an upright, morally pious person or not. Here we have the family, kind of the genealogy, the family tree of Terah, which would be the father of Abraham, Haran, and Nahor. They were his three sons. Sarai was a daughter of his, but by a different mother than Avram had. So they were step siblings. And then we've already talked about Hagar being the mother of Ishmael, as Avram and Sarah were waiting for God to fulfill his promise of a child. Sarah was barren for many years, and it took 25 years for Isaac, the child of promise, to be born. And here's Rivka, who's Isaac's wife, and you can trace her genealogy back to Terah through Nahor. Bethuel was her father. We have already encountered Laban, who was her brother, and Laban was the father of Leah and Rachel, the two girls that Yaakov married, along with their maidservants Bilhah and Zilpah. So that's the family tree. Here we have the kind of breakdown of which wife bore which children. Leah had the most of them. And in the chart, as we've looked at it before, it's only the sons that have been listed, but Dinah or Dinah was a daughter that was born to Yaakov through Leah. And so I have added her to the chart here. She is the youngest of all the children that Leah bore. Then Zilpah, who was Leah's maidservant, bore Gad and Asher. Rachel was barren for a long time, so her maidservant Bilhah bore Dan and Naphtali while the family was there in Haran in Syria. And eventually Rachel was enabled to have Yosef, which was his father's favorite, as Rachel was his father's, was Jacob's favorite wife. And then Binyamin will be born down in the land of Canaan, which is the promised land proper. In these last through slides, I have borrowed some material from the Dake Study Bible, the Dake Annotated Reference Bible, where he makes the case that Jacob took his wives immediately, and he didn't have to wait 7 years after his marriage to Leah in order to marry Rachel, and then, like wait another 7 years to eventually marry Leah. So if you're interested in reading this material, it is worthwhile, because the typical chronology that is applied to this scenario of Yaakov up in Haran, the typical chronology does not work. And Dake makes the case that Yaakov took Leah as his wife, kind of unwittingly, very soon after he arrived in Haran. Maybe a week is a possibility based on Bible passages. Maybe a month was kind of like a down payment on the 7 years that Jacob had promised to work. And then probably a week or a month later, he was able to take Rachel as his wife. So basically, he had most of that 20 years to be fathering children by those two girls and their two maidservants. If you would like to read through this material, I'm going to encourage you to pause the video at this point. Give yourself enough time to read through this screen, and then push play again, which will bring you to this slide. I'll move my picture out of the way so you can read it. So if you want to read slide number 2 on this subject, pause the recorder now, pause the video now, read through this screen, and once you're finished, push the button again. That will bring you to the third screen here. I'm going to have to move myself a little bit further this time for you to be able to read that screen. So pause. Read the screen at your leisure, and then push play again, which will bring us to the end of the PowerPoint presentation. And we are now ready to jump into our text for today, Genesis 34. Once again, we're using the Accordance free Bible software. The software program itself is free, at least the one I'm using. You can pay for a better version than the one that I'm using, but you do have to pay for all of the the materials, the text materials that go into it. So the Bibles that I have bought that we are using here are the New King James Version with Strong's. Strong's lexicon that's attached to this gives you Greek and Hebrew words that stand behind the English words, and those definitions appear in the information window here at the bottom of the screen. So New King James Version with Strong's. I've also got the HMT stands for Hebrew Masoretic Text. W4 is just the version of it, I think. This is the standard scholarly Hebrew text of the Old Testament with all of the vowel symbols and accents and stuff like that. That too is equipped with information from Strong's lexicon that's tied to that, so you can see what these Hebrew words are, and even what part of speech they are, which is very handy. What parsing of the verbs and so forth. I've also got the LXX, which is the Septuagint. That's the Roman numeral for 70. Septuagint is the Greek way of saying that 70 editors put this Greek translation of the Old Testament together. And it too is tied to Strong's lexicon. And then the final purchase that I made here for our purposes in this study is the Dake Study Bible, which I believe is copyrighted under Dake's Annotated Reference of Bible. So let's jump into our text now. Genesis 34:1. Now Dinah, or Dinah in English, the daughter of Leah, so Leah was her mom, whom she had borne to Yaakov, she went out to see the daughters of the land. Now, because we know that there's going to be a rape involved, there's always going to be a temptation to blame somebody for the rape. Shechem is going to be the perpetrator. There's no question about that. He doesn't deny it, so he is definitely guilty. But again, the temptation is always to see if there isn't a little bit of guilt on the part of the woman who is the victim in these rapes. Whether that is a reasonable way to think about such things, I'll leave that up to you. The same thing applies to the story of David and Bathsheba. David was attracted to her because he saw her bathing naked on her rooftop. So did she bear some guilt in the fact that, she conceived out of wedlock with David and so forth? Again, I'll leave that up to you if you think that is a legitimate pursuit or not. It is interesting that Josephus, the 1st century AD, or Common Era historian, who just provides us with a plethora of historical information about the biblical period. Josephus, when he interprets this story in the volume Antiquities of the Jews, in the works of Josephus, he says that she went to one of the festivals at Shechem. Shechem here being the name of the city where these events took place. So Dinah was spending some time out in the community, and whether it was right for her to do that or not, again, I'll leave that up to you. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the Hivites are people groups like Hittites and Perizzites and Jebusites and all the Canaanites and things like all the different people groups that were populating this country. Well, Hamor and Shechem were from among the Hivites. And we pointed to where Shechem was located on the map. I would guess that the Hivites lived in that region. So again, Hamor's name means a donkey, and Shechem means to rise up early in the morning to kind of, lift your shoulders out of bed, I suppose. And they lived in the city of Shechem. So Hamor was a prince, a Nasi of the country. So among the Hivites, he was probably the leader of the city of Shechem. Again, named his son after the city or the city after his son. He saw Shechem saw Dinah, and he took her and lay with her and violated her. So there's no question here from the from the text of Scripture that this was an inappropriate sexual relation that was had there. Let me scroll this a bit and see what the Hebrew word for violated her there is anah. Down in the information window, you can see that it's spelled with an ain, a nun, and a he. And it means a lot of things. It means to oppress, to humiliate, or to be afflicted. And, I think we could say, depending on the level of consent on her part and his part, that will determine which of these English words we should use here. Violated certainly fits. Um, if she was raped against her will, then humiliated, certainly afflicted. And in the biblical era, for a woman to have been violated in such a way would be not only, a mark of shame on the person who committed the rape, the man, but also on the woman because she was no longer unspoiled. She was no longer a virgin, and so her marketability as a woman of potential marriage would be severely limited by this part of her history. Now, how public this rape was, we don't know. If all the neighbors knew about it, that would make her stigma that she bore even greater. So the rape took place. Then verse 3, his soul, Shechem's soul, his nephesh, the realm of his feelings and emotions, was strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Yaakov, and he loved the young woman. This is achav, the standard Hebrew word for love. It is the word that is used about the love between a husband and a wife. It can also be a word that's used, about physical attraction and passion and things like that. These are all tied to the nefesh, to the feelings and emotions. And he loved the young woman and spoke kindly to the young woman. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this young woman as a wife." Now, this may seem a little inappropriate, an inappropriate way to address his father, because normally it was the father or the two parents who would get together with the parents of the beloved, and they would make some kind of an arrangement about whether this marriage would take place or not. But in this case, Shechem is very much like Samson, who was one of the judges and definitely had a problem with the ladies, a moral problem with the ladies. Samson demanded of his father to get him a wife from among the Gentiles in the region, from among I think she was a Philistine. So Shechem is kind of insisting that his father get this young woman as a wife. And I think this statement of Shechem's was probably prompted by just the power of his emotions, maybe clouding his ability to reason and so forth. Now, before we get any further in the text, I want to pause a little bit and talk about the ramifications of non-marital sexual relations. I want to share we'll go to another word processor, not word processor, Bible software program. This one is called eSword, and it is free, and you can get just a plethora of free stuff, free volumes. So in accordance, you have to buy all the Bibles and all the commentaries and stuff that you get. In eSword, most of that stuff is free, and there's some really good stuff on there. So if you would like to get into Bible software programs and you don't want to spend a lot of money on it, I have probably got thousands of dollars wrapped up in purchases that I've made for my Bible software stuff. If you don't want to spend that much on it, eSword is a great place to start because I think everything I have displayed here on the screen is free. They're free downloads. Now, you can purchase mainly copyrighted material to add to your collection of eSword documents. But this is a great place to start. So here we'll be reading in the ESV, and this is from 1 Corinthians 6, where Paul is talking about the implications and kind of the fallout of sexual relations. Paul is talking about relations between men and women in today's society. I know it extends beyond that. But he is talking about the kind of the long-lasting um, uh, consequences. Um, and it can be consequences and it can be blessings that go along with sexual relationships. And we need to understand that from a biblical perspective, from God's perspective, the only sexual relations that should take place between human beings is within the context of a marriage between a man and a woman. And God anticipates that that marriage will last until death parts them. The Bible says God hates divorce. So within the family and within the marriage is the only place where God will permit and bless sexual relations. Now, from the very beginning in the Bible, we'll see that sexual relations took place outside of marriage. So God is not blind to the fact that people are going to disobey his guidance and transgress his laws about sexual relationships. And oftentimes, since God is a God of grace, he can bless a um, a sexual relationship that takes place outside of marriage. And one of the great examples of that is David and Bathsheba. After David committed adultery with the wife of Uriah the Hittite, and then arranged for the murder of Uriah to cover his adultery, God ended up blessing that marriage, that union, and the first surviving son of that union, Shlomo, Solomon, became it'd be the third king of it. He succeeded his father as king of Israel, and God blessed him in extraordinary ways, made him the wisest man ever, except Jesus. So Paul is writing here about what sexual relations do to people, particularly outside of marriage. So Paul writes here in 2 Corinthians or 1 Corinthians 6:16, he says, "Do you not know that he was joined to a prostitute?" So this is definitely a sexual relationship that takes place outside of marriage, unless you happen to be married to a prostitute. He was joined to a prostitute, becomes one body with her, for it is written, the two will become one flesh. So that comes straight from, I believe that's Genesis 2:24, and is quoted many times throughout the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. So when two people unite themselves sexually in a relationship, according to the Bible, they cleave together. Davak is the Hebrew word for that. That's the word that's used in Genesis for the uniting of a man and a woman through sexual intercourse. It's the modern Hebrew word for glue, and I think it had that idea too. So when you have sexual relationships with a person, you are glued to them. And this isn't just talking about, physical touching with another human being. Yes, they do become one flesh because they unite their two bodies together. And there's always the potential here of creating a new life, a baby being born. But Paul is going deeper than that, and he's talking about how two hearts are melded together, his heart and her heart. They are davach, they are united together. And this is a union that can never be broken. And I haven't always been a believer in the God of the Bible, and Yeshua, Jesus, has not always been my savior. So I lived in a very immoral sexual environment when I was growing up. I was born in 1953, so I was a pretty young kid through the 60s and the 70s. I was a teenager then, went off to college, spent some time in the military, and sexual immorality was just so rampant in those days. So I know what it's like to live in a society where sin and not non-biblical sexual morality uh, holds sway and kind of rules of the world. So Paul is emphasizing that if you have a sexual union with a person that you're not married to, and then like if it's a prostitute, you'll probably never see that woman again. You go away from that person. She is still with you on the inside. Your hearts, your souls are bound together. They are davak. And that never goes away. And if you later, after an episode with a prostitute or a sexual union with someone that you don't end up getting married to, when you do get married, um, your love for and your being bound, like binded together with that person, does not go away in a marriage. And you can't help but think of that previous partner. And the first person that you have a sexual relationship with, particularly if it's an enjoyable experience. Sometimes, I mean, for Diana, it was probably not an enjoyable sexual experience, unless she wanted it too. Uh, but I mean, this is an experience. It's a memory. There will be mental visions of this event, of this binding together, this unity that you've experienced. And it doesn't go away, and there will always be comparisons, and your soul will always be longing for that person that you have had that relationship with. And for many people, before they get married, there are many partners. And so your heart and your soul are being pulled in many different directions. This is going to cause you nothing but conflict. Paul goes on to say, he who is joined to the Lord becomes one spirit with him. That's in contrast to being bound fleshly and, in an emotional way. So he says, flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. So I wanted to share that with you just to talk about biblical morality when it comes to sexual intercourse. And yes, I know that the Bible is just full of extramarital sexual unions, and we will come across plenty of those in the book of Genesis. But I wanted to share this with you, and I just want you to kind of use what we have just studied as a lens that you can project upon Shechem and Dinah and see what kind of issues they're going to be dealing with for the rest of their lives. Now, spoiler alert, Shechem doesn't have much life left. So some bad things are going to happen to him because of this. But this is something that Dinah will live with for the rest of her life if she is able to marry, to find a man who loves her and wants to spend the rest of his life with her. This experience that she has had with Shechem will haunt her for the rest of her life. And I don't believe that experience easily goes away. I do think it sticks with a person for the rest of their lives. Divorced people, find the same situations. You've been with more than one partner, and this can be a biblically permissible divorce and a biblically permissible remarriage. The remarriage can have God's blessing, and yet this will be a problem because Dinah and Shechem have had this very intimate experience together. Their souls will be davakt. They will be bound together, cemented together, glued together for the rest of their lives. And it can bring about jealousy. It can bring about comparisons. It can bring about a longing for a relationship with a person who is no longer in your life. So yeah, keep that in mind, and maybe that'll give us a little compassion for these two youngsters. Now, verse 5, Yaakov heard that he, Shechem, had defiled Dinah, his daughter. Now his sons were with his livestock in the field, so Yaakov held his peace until they came. So Yaakov didn't fly off the handle. He kept calm, which was probably very difficult to do. I'm the father of 3 daughters, and if anything like this had ever happened to one of my daughters, I think the old United States Marine would kick in and want to take some revenge on anybody that would stoop to giving one of my daughters this kind of a horrible experience. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Yaakov to speak with him. And the sons of Yaakov came in from the field when they heard it. And the men were grieved and very angry. The Hebrew word here for grieved is atzav. And it can be just sad because of something that, has not gone your way, or it can be grieved because you've lost a loved one. So, you feel this great sense of loss. Many applications of this word, and they were very angry. The word for angry here is chara, which means to burn with anger. Chara is a Hebrew word for heat and and flame and so forth. So grieved and very angry, that's the emotional state that they were in, because he, Shechem, had done a disgraceful thing in Israel. The Hebrew word for disgraceful is naval, which means it does mean a disgraceful thing. It also means folly or foolishness. There is a famous character in the Bible in the days of King David, whose name is Nabal, which comes from the same root. And there, I think the Bible, says, no, this guy Nabal, he was well named because he was a fool. His name means fool, and he was one. So this is a foolish thing, a disgraceful thing. I think disgraceful is the best interpretation in this scenario. Done a disgraceful thing in Israel. Now, this almost makes it sound like there is a nation of Israel, and there is not at this point. There are 3 generations of one family, now 4 generations, that have been wandering around the Promised Land for some time, just here, there, and everywhere. They're shepherds, so they go from place to place, particularly in the southern regions of the Promised Land. But I think the term Israel is just being used here as a reference to Yaakov by his name that God gave him, the name that God gave him being Israel. So this disgraceful thing had happened within the family of Israel, we'll say, by lying with Yaakov's daughter, a thing that had to be done. Now, I don't want to push this too far, but I have made the statement before that when this guy, Jacob, is behaving in a very worldly way, the Bible refers to him as Yaakov. When he's behaving in a very godly, faithful way, then the Bible refers to him as Israel. Well, he's called by both names here. So we'll see how he handles this, and we'll see if he handles it as an Israel or if he handles it as a Yaakov. So, uh, this is a thing that which ought not to be done. But Hamor spoke with them. In other words, he spoke with Yaakov and Yaakov's sons, Dinah's brothers. He spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter." Now, this actually sounds kind of romantic, doesn't it? These are Hamor's words. This is the way he's interpreting the situation. But we've already seen that Shechem loves her. Um, I mean, certainly physically loves her. He probably had a lot of fun with her. But I think he's talking about his soul cleaving to her, like we've been talking about. Another thing that we need to understand, and we will come across this in the 26th verse of this chapter, is that ever since this rape happened, Dinah has been living at Shechem's house. She's been living with him. Now, she could be being held there against her will, or she could be in love with Shechem and wants to stay with him and wants this marriage to take place. So, this marriage that's trying to be arranged here may be something that Dinah wants, or it may be something that she does not want. She does not want to be married to her rapist. No doubt that he raped her, but now he loves her. Maybe she loves him, and maybe she doesn't. Maybe she hates him. So, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife. Now, the law of Moses really discouraged the marriage of Jewish people to anyone other than Jewish people. And we've already seen that Yaakov's parents did not want their son Yaakov marrying a Canaanite girl. And maybe part of the reason for this is Esau, their other son, had already married Canaanite girls. So this would be, a marriage between Hebrews and Hivites, so two different people groups worshiping different gods with different standards. So you can probably kind of imagine how Jacob's family, would feel about this idea, and maybe you can even imagine how Shechem's family is going to feel about this. So yeah, he's requesting that Jacob give Dinah to his son as a wife. So you shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Now, this is kind of a business transaction in a way. Hamor is saying to Yaakov, I know you don't own any property here in the land of Canaan. But if you agree to intermarriages between our two families, then that's gonna give you some property here. You'll have access to the land where we're dwelling, and you can do your business here and acquire possessions for yourselves in it. So there's kind of a land transaction being offered here. Then Shechem said to her father, to Yaakov, and her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I will give. He's talking about a bride price. Normally, when these marriages were arranged, since the daughter would be leaving her father's family, a bride price would be given to the bride's father to compensate for the loss of a daughter in the household. Now, the groom's family, on the other hand, was going to be gaining a daughter in their family, so that would be advantageous to them. So the bride price would be to kind of offset the advantage and disadvantage of the transaction that was going to take place. So Shechem is basically saying to Yaakov and Dinah's brothers, whatever you ask as a bride price, I'll give it. Make it as high as you want. I'm willing to pay anything because I love your sister, I love your daughter that much. So this sounds like a rich kid, doesn't it? So verse 12, ask me ever so much dowry. That's the bride price. That's the mohar uh, in Hebrew. So much dowry and gift, matan from Natan, which is to give. Then if you put a mem at the front of Natan, it becomes a noun, which is a gift. Ask me for whatever you want, dowry and gift, and I will give according to what you say to me. But give me the young woman as a wife. The young woman is a na'ar. I'm surprised there's not a hey on the end of this word. Um, our information at the bottom of the page does have a hey. If you look down here, there's the hey at the end of the word, which makes it feminine. This is a feminine singular noun, and I would expect to see an H here. Now, there is a kametz under, which is a vowel under the resh, under the R. So maybe that satisfies that feminine requirement. I think there should be an H there, but nonetheless, give me the woman, the na'ara as a wife, as a isha, as my isha, my ishi. But the sons of Yaakov answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, and spoke deceitfully. Now this is key. Um, we need to understand that the response that at least the sons of Yaakov, this text doesn't say that Yaakov was involved in the response to Hamor's and Shechem's offer. And it says here that they spoke deceitfully. Mirma is the Hebrew word, which means deceit, like intentionally deceitful, um, intentionally misleading. So the words that they are speaking here is not what their hearts are sensing and their souls are feeling. This is intentional deceit, misleading. So they spoke deceitfully because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. So the brothers are angry about this defilement, this timeh, tamah in Hebrew means to be unclean. Now, how shall I delicately put this? Any sexual union is going to produce precious bodily fluids, let's put it that way. And the fluids that are produced in sexual intercourse make a person unclean. So if Dinah has had sexual intercourse, she would be unclean. But I think if it's the same for women as it is for men, that kind of uncleanness only lasts until evening, and then a person is considered clean. They have to wash their clothes and stuff. That is not the kind of defilement. That is not the kind of uncleanness that is being talked about here. This is the stigma that Dinah will carry around for the rest of her life, that she has been defiled before marriage, outside of marriage. So he had defiled Dinah, their sister, and they said to them, this is the brothers. The brothers are saying to Shechem and Hamor, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a reproach to us. Now, there are groups in the Middle East that are, religious groups and non-religious groups that circumcise. They're infant males. Sometimes they're adult males also. So circumcision is a unique, significant spiritual sign of the Abrahamic covenant. Remember in chapter 17 of Genesis, Abraham was instructed to be circumcised and to circumcise his son Ishmael, the only son he had at that time, because that was going to be a sign of the Abrahamic covenant. So the unique physical sign of the Abrahamic covenant that Jewish people bear is circumcision among their males. So Uh, these Hebrew guys who have been circumcised are saying, well, we can't intermarry with you guys because the men among the Hivites are not circumcised. So that would be a reproach to us. Perpa, kind of an embarrassment, a reproach, a sense of shame upon us if we would allow our children to marry uncircumcised men. But on this condition, and condition, the word condition really isn't in the Hebrew text. It doesn't need to be, but it's added here in the English because because the sons of Jacob are going to propose a condition upon which we will consent to you. If you will become as we are, if every male of you is circumcised, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. So that's the proposal. But if you will not heed us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and be gone. So we've already been told that these guys, these sons of Jacob, were dealing deceitfully with Hamor and Shechem. And so what was the deceit? What was the deceit? Well, we'll see. It will become very obvious. The condition that they've made is that all the men in the Hivite community in the city of Shechem need to be circumcised, and then there can be interaction, and then we'll all be one big happy family. And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. Why would it be pleasing to them? Well, because for what Shechem had done, it would not have been unlikely that the sons of Yaakov would have just slit their throats right then and there for such a thing to have happened. But these sons of Yaakov are negotiating with them, so it's looking pretty good for Hamor and Shechem, at least to this point. Verse 19, so the young man did not delay to do the thing because he delighted in Yaakov's daughter. He was more honorable than all the household of his father. So this is an interesting thing to say about Shechem. It sounds like Shechem either did get circumcised right away so he could marry Dinah, but it says that he, Shechem, was more honorable than all of the household of his father. His father is Hamor. So, the conversation is going to go on here with all the men of the city to see if we can make this business arrangement via circumcision so that we can trade with each other, so that we can intermarry, so that we can share land. Basically, I think what the men of Shechem, of the city of Shechem, are going to be thinking is, this Yaakov is very rich, and he's got at least one pretty daughter, and so if we go through this circumcision thing, maybe we can benefit by his riches by doing business with him. If they're religious people, they may have noticed that God has been blessing Yaakov. So maybe if they are in like an agreement or in a contract with Yaakov, then maybe they get some of that blessing too. So it sounds like because Shechem was more honorable, kaved is kaved or kavad is the Hebrew word, and it means heavy or honored, which is the application here. But this is the Hebrew word for glory. Like the glory of God is his kavod. It's weightiness. It's the tangible presence of God kind of pressing down on you, kind of like gravity, because God is real, and he's weighty and he's glorious. So Shechem was more honorable than all the household of his father, and we'll see how that plays out. And Hamor and Shechem, his son, came to the gate of their city and spoke with the men of their city, saying, these men are at peace with us. At least they think that they are. because the Hebrews are willing to make a deal with them that involves intermarriage. Therefore, let them dwell in the land and trade in it. For indeed, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us as wives, and let us give them our daughters also as wives. Only on this condition will the men consent to dwell with us, to be one people, if every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their livestock, their property, and every animal of theirs be ours? That almost sounds like these men of Shechem, led by Hamor, and although Shechem is more honorable than any of them, it sounds like they, of course, have the advantage in numbers. There are more Hivites than there are Hebrews. So maybe they just want to steal all of Yaakov's livestock and property. Every animal will be ours. That sounds like stealing. It may just be the idea that if we do business with them, we will profit. If we're in a business relationship, then some of that wealth from all of Jacob's property and livestock and so forth, will come our way. We'll benefit by it. And all who went out of the gate of his city heeded Hamor and Shechem his son, and every male was circumcised. All who went out of the gate of the city. So now, one thing we need to understand is that circumcision involves a surgical procedure. It's not a major surgical procedure, but it's a very sensitive one. The foreskin of the penis is removed surgically, and then it kind of naturally heals up on its own, but it takes a few days for this to happen. And in the meantime, while these men are healing up from their circumcision surgery, they're going to find it very hard to walk and to move and to sleep. It's going to be very uncomfortable for them. So they are at a great disadvantage in case some violence would come their way, and that's what is going to happen. Now it came to pass on the third day, when they were in pain, that two of the sons of Yaakov, Shimon and Levi. Now, in a way, what's about to happen is kind of surprising with the tribe of Levi, because Levi is like the church workers. They are the ones who sing in the choir at the temple. They're the ones who assist the priests in all of the animal sacrifices and stuff like that. So these seem like gentle, very pious people. But of course, the temple hasn't been built yet, and in fact, there's not even a temple. That's going to come. That's going to come later. Everybody's kind of at this point in history. Everybody's kind of doing his own religious thing. They're building altars and making animal sacrifices because that's essential in demonstrating how salvation is going to be won by shed blood of an innocent substitute victim. So two of these sons, Shimon and Levi, these are both sons of Leah, and Dinah is their sister. They all have the same mom and the same dad. So Dinah's brothers each took his sword and came boldly upon the city and killed all the males. So this is not an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So, if you were going to have some proportional punishment dealt out, then Shechem was the only one who committed the rape. He's the only one who should have been punished. And you might say, well, Hamor should have been punished also because he didn't control his son very well, and his son committed a penalty that in those days was punishable by death. So Shechem certainly should have died for his crime, and maybe Hamor, but Levi and Shimon killed all the males in the city. Now, later in the Bible, when the Hebrews eventually enter the land of Canaan to possess it as their promised land, God's instructions to them will be, when you encounter the Canaanites, you're to kill every man, woman, and child, and even kill their animals. Um, they would take over their houses, they would eat the fruit from their fruit trees and the crops from their fields, but all of the human beings among the Canaanites were to be killed. So this is, kind of a foreshadowing of that. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that God, spoke to Shimon and Levi and said, kill them all. He may have, because there is a precedent for that in the Bible, but he may not have. This may be the anger and the kind of the vengeance of these two guys. They may have just said, this is how I think it should be settled. Now, later in the book of Genesis, we will come across the blessings that Yaakov gives. I think this is chapter 49. Yaakov gives special blessings to each one of his sons. And in those blessings, when it comes to Shimon and Levi, he talks about how violent they are and how kind of out of control their violence is. So the blessing that they receive from their father contains this sort of a reprimand, sort of a criticism of the kind of character that these two guys have. So they killed all the males, and they killed Hamor and Shechem, his son, with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house. So this is where we learn that Dinah has been living in the house ever since the rape took place. And again, maybe willingly, maybe as like a hostage or a kind of a prisoner. And so they took Dinah from Shechem's house and went out. The sons of Yaakov came upon the slain and plundered the city. Now, I don't know, when it talks about the sons of Yaakov here, I don't know if that's talking about just Levi and Shimon, or if the rest of the brothers, realized what had happened to the men of the city. And so they jumped on the bandwagon and plundered the city because their sister had been defiled. Now, for some reason, I always thought the city of Shechem was burned, but I don't think the Bible says that it was. I think it was just plundered as far as all the possessions that people had there. I mean, everybody's dead, so nobody's going to be living in the houses in Shechem. Nobody's going to be taking care of the animals. Nobody's going to have all the furniture and stuff like that. So the Hebrews go in there and plunder the city because their sister had been defiled. They took their sheep, their oxen, and their donkeys, what was in the city and what was in the field, and all their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, they took captive. Now, what they did with these captive wives and children, I don't think the Bible tells us. They may have been slaves or servants in the household of Yaakov. So that, they may have helped, take care of the flocks and herds. Sounds like they may have had, some of them may have been crop farmers and whatever else they did. They may have invited these women and children to, continue in that kind of work. And they plundered even all that was in the houses. So these wives, now widows, and the children are captives. I assume among the Hebrews. I assume that they stayed among the Hebrews. Now, isn't this ironic? If we are correct in understanding the dishonorable attitude that all the men of Shechem, the city of Shechem, had in wanting to get Jacob's wealth, it turns out the other way around. Jacob gets their wealth. So how ironic. And this is just a warning to anybody who wants to do harm to God's people. And I'm talking about the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. I'm talking about the Jewish people and the land of Israel. who right now, as I'm making this video, there is a war going on in Gaza that was started by a terrorist attack on October 7th of 2023 and has gone on until we are almost to April in 2024. And Gaza is just about being wiped out. The Palestinians are just about being wiped out. And I'm not saying, well, I am saying Israel is fighting this war the way you fight a war if you want to win. I have said, seems like I've said recently, in my lifetime, I was born in 1953, so I'm 70, going on 71 years of age. The United States of America has not won a war in my lifetime. Israel has not lost a war in my lifetime. Israel knows how to fight to win. And they are not brutal. They are concerned for the welfare of innocent civilians and do what they can to protect them. But Israel fights to win. And if Israel has its way, there will be no more Hamas left after the war in Gaza. America is not on board with that. And in recent weeks, the American, the Biden administration has resisted like everything that Israel wants to do. They are showing that they are not friends of Israel. And if you are not blessing Israel, then you are under a curse from God. And that's what happened to Hamor and Shechem. They disgraced a daughter of Israel, and they paid a very high penalty for it. Now, you might think, what the sons of Yaakov did is disproportional. You fight wars disproportionately. That is one of the keys to success of winning wars. War is a horrible thing, but if you're going to fight a war, you better fight it to win, and you fight disproportionately. You take a much greater toll than on your enemy than your enemy can take on you. So it is in America's interest to be friends with Israel, because if we are blessing Israel, God will bless us. And he has blessed us abundantly up until, so the last 20 or so years, maybe 30 or so years, when, the political left of America has turned against Israel, kind of gradually, more so now than I've ever seen it in the past. And America is setting itself up to be under a curse from God. And if you think I'm making this up, check the Abrahamic covenant in Genesis chapter 12, where God says, the people that bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you will be cursed by God, by me. Okay, verse 30. Then Yaakov said to Shimon and Levi, you have troubled me. Akal is the Hebrew word for being troubled. You've made my life difficult by making me obnoxious. The Hebrew word here is ba'ash, and it means to stink, to be odious. So I am an unpleasant aroma in the nostrils of the inhabitants of the land. So yes, the Shechemites, the people who lived in Shechem, outnumbered the Hebrews, but the Hebrews totally destroyed them. But there are other Canaanites living in the land, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, and however many other tribes there are that are going to learn about what's happened here. And Yaakov is afraid of what the consequences might be for him. So you've made me obnoxious. You've made me stink among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me. I shall be destroyed, my household and I. So Yaakov sees the potential of the vengeance and the military success that his sons have had on the people who treated his daughter this way. But it could turn out bad for Yaakov, and he's fearful of that. He's concerned about that. But he is a man of faith. So we'll see if he trusts God for his protection and provision. But then the sons respond, what they said, should he treat our sister like a harlot? A zonah is the Hebrew word for a harlot. So in their opinion, Shechem treated her like she was a prostitute. They're not saying she is a prostitute or was a prostitute, but she was treated as if she was one because he defiled her. And that's where this chapter ends. So next time we get together for a study, we will be in chapter 35 with kind of the aftermath of this story, but really not much is said about this story afterwards. I think we will see that Jacob and his family moved to a different location, you know, probably put a little distance between them and the scene of the crime. Whether it was a crime or not, I'll allow you to decide. And you know, any culpability that Dinah did or did not have in this story, I'll leave that up to you to decide. If you'd like to express your opinion, leave a comment below about whether you think Dinah was culpable in some way. Maybe was kind of coming on to Shechem, liked the attention that he was giving her. Maybe you want to comment about whether you think it was appropriate for Shimon and Levi to do what they did to seek vengeance upon this, not only the household of Hamor, but also the whole city there. So yeah, feel free to leave your opinions, and I'll check them out and try to respond if I can. Let me give you the Old Covenant blessing from Numbers chapter 6. We'll do it in Hebrew first and then in English. And for this blessing, I will be pronouncing the name of God because I think it's appropriate in giving this blessing. So we will be saying the sacred name. And here is the blessing. Receive it. Yivarechecha Yahweh vayishmarecha. Ya'er Yahweh panav elecha vayuhunecha. Isa Yahweh panav elecha vayasem lecha shalom. In English, the way we learn it in English, with the substitution for God's name. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. Shalom, my dear friends. Hope to see you next time.